Hey guys, I thought today I would do a breakdown of some writing skills. I have never actually thought about it before. So I've been writing for probably over 15 years, and for the majority of that time, I wasn't seriously writing, not being able to finish novels, not being able to do anything. So maybe I'll just describe the process. So I had a few years, and this isn't like efficient. Like I learned drawing, so I learned drawing within a few months, and then was decent with that, and then had to struggle with the design process and some of the larger pressures. And now I'm sort of at a starting point where I can branch out, learn different methods, and develop things further. But with writing, I didn't so much have that. So most people they assume that writing is all about grammar. Um, that if you don't know grammar, that you're going to be a terrible writer. And it might be for some people. Like maybe that's the most important thing. Like you've got to know your paragraphs and sentences and clauses and things like that. I still haven't learned that to this day, and it probably does hold me back. I'll be I'll be honest. But I kind of think of it like if you're drawing and you're an artist and you don't have perfect line work or you're a bit of a looser style. I think it's okay to have a style that isn't super tight on grammar. I think that's okay. So I remember reading Forrest Gump, and Forrest Gump was all written in the kind of grammar that Forrest Gump would speak in. So grammar is actually internally about voice and about the voice of your narrator. And this is probably one of the biggest things that I actually consider when I'm writing a book is I think about the voice of the narrator. You could break that down into something as simple as like, is it first person? Is it I did something, then like he did this and she did that? Like, are you talking from like a point of view, like your point of view, or are you talking more third person, where, X character, like main character did this, main character did that, and then side character did this, side character did that? I tend to like third person perspective, because I sometimes find this first person perspective is a little bit too journally. So you want to take into consideration the design idea of whether you're using first or third person. So, first person is going to be magnificent for a kind of journal, and you can just speak in whatever voice you want the the kind of journal entrance to be like. But you can also do a kind of omniscient idea of a journal. So it's not about the character that you're talking about. You're specifically going to switch into each person that you're doing, and so you can almost always be looking from that person's perspective. And the reason I would consider uh, thinking of grammar not being that important, except only as a part of the voice of the narration, is because the voice of the narrator is going to tell a person a lot about the tone of your story and a lot about the feeling that they're meant to have. Like, are they meant to be loose and casual and more relaxed about things, or are they meant to be like super intelligent? And this is going to break down into also the vocabulary you use. So, if you use like super snooty words that nobody's going to know, then that's one tone, which is more the literature sort of angle. And this is a purposeful direction that I didn't want to go in with my writing. Um, and then there is, the more casual sort of tone. And so for me, with my ideas and understanding set, I kind of knew that I didn't want to be perfect with grammar. I wanted my voice narration to be third person perspective, then I knew that, I wanted a more casual style because this is kind of my choice of how I'm setting up the voice of um, the voice of the narrator because it's got to be consistent. And once you have selected basically your voice uh, and the tone of the story, then you keep that consistent throughout. Um, and with it being, you can actually change it. So for design purposes, you may change it. So for example, a person might read a letter in the book. Say you're doing it third person, and then all of a sudden, it switches to first person to change the perspective, like to create like a shock, like a kind of asymmetry. So you might sometimes actually use the change of the voice narration for effect. And I actually do this in my writing sometimes. So at times when I really need things to pop out and be super different, I'll literally change the voice of the narrator. And if I want to communicate to the audience, like, you've got to be even more casual now, or more casual in your observation, I might change the voice to be even more casual. Or if I want them to be more frightened or more like tense, I'll change the voice to be a little bit more tense. And so sometimes the voice can actually tell you by inference how a character is feeling, because it's almost like the storyteller is starting to get affected by the person that's going through things. And I've never really thought about this kind of thing before, but I definitely do always select a voice, and that is one of my design considerations whenever doing something. It's something that's in the background, that's always passive and always exists there. Okay, so the very next thing, because I haven't got this organized in my head, um, that I do is I start to think about. I'm sort of struggling between, is it concept that I think about, or do I think about the length and structure of the story? Let's just say length and structure, because they're kind of connected. And why would concept and the length of your story be connected? Um, Maybe before we go to that, actually, is we can talk about. Mm, it's not length, it's not concept, it's follow through. Like, is this a solid? No, that's part of this. So that's part of like whether it's solid or not. Is it a solid concept? mm, and then there's ideas of style. Sorry, I'm just getting some things straight in my head. Because one of the things when you learn something naturally over a long period of time, everything kind of gets shoved in a box, and it's all unorganized, and the person themselves, even if they're good at what they do, they're not going to understand what makes them good at what they do. And I've had a few different skills where that's been the case. Like initially when I was super young, I learned tons of martial arts, and if I have to describe it to people, I'm going to be describing like advanced concepts rather than broken down simple steps, because that's all I can remember after a certain period of time. Um, so that becomes a whole thing. Um, Whereas for learning drawing, I've learnt that so quickly that it's much easier to break it down into specific steps and sort of exact components. Okay, so I'm thinking, should it be like voice? That is the first thing. That is absolutely the first thing. I'm wondering if the concept, length, and solidity of the idea. So solidity of an idea is this idea kind of like transient where I'm like, it's kind of a good idea right now, and then I get bored and I can't follow through. So, it being solid just means you can follow through on it. And that is a question all of itself, like how you follow through, how you finish books, um, and how you can actually achieve that. That is a whole other ball game because most people they're not going to finish books that they start. It's very difficult that you create an idea and then you say, I don't really like that for whatever reason, and then you jump back to the start again, try a new concept, and then you just keep turning into like a restarter where you just constantly restart your books and whatever rather than following through on concept until the the end phase um, of the goal of the book. So for me, the goal of a book, yeah, this is the second one. Okay, so good, good, good. Okay, so let's go here. So the second one is the goal of a book or the goal of a piece of writing. If you don't have the goal of the piece of writing, then even the concept and that sort of thing, it's not going to um, help you very much because it could just be one of those things where you have this concept, you have follow through, you have whatever, but then when do you stop? When do you restart? When do these choices like you have to have a goal in order to start to understand um, like what length is necessary to achieve this goal, what how you're going to be following through on this, how you're going to avoid restarts, and that's true on chapters and paragraphs and things as well, to eventually get to where you need to get to. So often my goals will actually be lessons, or symbols, or emotional journeys. So emotional journeys are made up of symbols, symbols, themes, things like this. Um, so your symbols and your themes, you kind of have to build up symbolism into people's minds so that they can kind of remember something. So in order to basically create like a little safe state in someone's mind, you have to turn it into symbols and themes. Because if you just give them tons of information, if you give them tons of info, like lots of info, if it doesn't turn into symbols and themes, then they're not going to be able to remember it, and then it will never reach the goal that you're going after. So, a message or a lesson that you're trying to teach someone, or even an experience that you're trying to take them through. So, for example, someone might not know what it feels like to do something, and you take them through enough symbols and themes and things they can relate to that they get to the lesson and the experience that you're looking for. And this is going to require you to be able to develop symbols and themes to be able to do that. And I know that seems like overly like specific, like, oh, you've got to turn information into symbols and themes. Oh my God, that's so complex. And then it goes into like this lesson and experience. Yeah, that is complex and it is weird, but how to do that is it's kind of an interesting process to slowly learn. But let's just say this is all within goal. So, um, and let's not go into like how you finish things. I think ultimately finishing things is about having that goal, um, knowing that there are certain symbols inherent within your mind or your understanding of that goal that you have to take people through. And this kind of takes me to another point, which is you have to be a guide. So whenever you are writing, this is the thing that you won't have initially. You won't have any understanding of how to guide people's understandings. Instead, you will try and tell them something from your own mind. And you will say, like, accept it or else. Like, just understand me. Just, you've got to get rid of all the rage and frustration. You've got to be super caring for your audience. Because if you can't get over rage and frustration at certain points of time where people have like misunderstood you and didn't know what the point was, and you're like, but the point is this, it's just obvious, just go back to this point and then look at that point, and then this point is connected to this point, and this point's connected to that point. Well, when you are writing, you have to make things as explicit as possible. So whenever you're writing a sentence, don't say something super indirect like Sally felt this wasn't the right way to go, wasn't right, it just seemed off. And I'm not saying that you can't say something like this, seemed off. Instead of saying something like that, you would just be like, it was obviously a ploy. Um, it was an obvious ploy. Because if you make something much more direct, then a person can basically save that in their mind. They can say like, "Oh, okay, haha, funny. It's an actual ploy. Okay, I get it. I get it." And then they're like, tick, it save states, um, rolls around in their mind, and now it's highlighted for them. They get it. Um, while if you kind of like putting everything in like wobbly language, nothing will save, so they'll eventually forget. And this brings me to a concept I call fading, or fading ink. And in drawing, I talk about speed. I talk about, there's speed and there's force and there's fitness as like some properties that you start to enhance. And fading ink is basically related to speed. So if you watch a movie and mm, you get to the second act, as the second act starts going and going and going, you start to forget the first act. And as you get to the third act, you've forgotten the first act, and you kind of remember some of the second act, but not completely. So there is always going to be like a bracket structure to someone's understanding. Um, and then outside of that, they're going to start forgetting like what even happened. And so you've got this central focus point of what they can remember and what they can anticipate and what happened recently. They do have some short term, some longer term memory for what has happened, like generally, but as it breaks down, it's going to be more basic sort of geometric shapes. Like this person dislikes this person believes in this person, this thing comes first before that other thing. While this is all full of nuance, the outer part of the fading ink is like going to be almost erased. So you've got to think of your writing that it's going to be erased. Like if someone's going to read it, they're not going to just appreciate the nuance of you making this point 1,000 times forever, infinitely. They're only going to appreciate that once, and then they're probably going to forget it, and then they're going to be like, huh, what's going on, and whatever. So you do this kind of thing where you're way more direct as an aspect of speed, and because it helps them, um, it helps you order things in more direct chunks that are more obvious to an audience, so that they can be like, ah, That's what it was. Now I remember it. Now it's good. Now it clicks. And you'll find that a lot of people have different principles um, when it comes to writing and guiding people through things. Like they might have like super simple tropes to follow. Like this person is this and this person's that, and it's just this very simplified version. So your simplification is essentially to guide people without and sort of understanding the limits of people's mental space and mental acuity to remember all the information. Because even as a writer, as much as you think you're going to remember everything that you wrote, you're not. So it's even good to guide yourself, like to make things obvious. So you're like, oh, right, this thing is comes first over that thing. This thing comes first over that thing. So it's kind of a learning journey as you write, learning to guide people. And something really simple about guiding that I always do is if I ever bring up a topic, I'm like, ba, 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 and then I bring up some topic. I'm like, oh, a topic or a concept or a word. I will always, I will always sort of go like, oh, all right, I need to go back. Sorry, I'm basically writing on my knee here. All right, so I'll go back and I will explain what this topic is before we get to it. So if some topic comes up naturally, I'll be like, wait, we need to explain that. Or if I can sense a topic is coming up, like, well, this is 99% of the time what I do. Like when you get better at it, you basically sense when you're going to bring up a topic and you just explain it beforehand. So an example could be, um, um, let's say ice skating with a gun or something. Let's say there's some sort of sport called skate shooting, and it's like, oh, our main character, blah 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 blah, and he was always envious of skate shooters. Well, then I'd be like, ooh, skate shooters are, it is a, a kind of sport where you mix the agility of skating with the necessary precision of shooting a target, um, shooting a moving target or something. So you create this little blurb or tag that you can connect back to the topic. And you can put that like right away. You can put it before, you can put it as is next to it, you can put it a little further ahead, but you have to connect these like little explainer tags to things so that people are like, "Oh, that's what that is." Like even if it's obvious, sometimes you will do it because not everyone will catch what you meant. So just having these like little explainer tags, people can just be like, "Oh, yeah, no, I get it," and they just run over it. It's not a problem. It's not like you're over explaining everything, but part of good writing is just going back and going like, "Oh, I'll fill in this blank. I left a blank there because I brought up a topic. Um, because I did bring up a topic, now there is a blank, so I'm just going to add a little tag that helps explain that, helps take them through that, and that's a big part of guiding people through what you're doing. Okay, I'm super disorganized here. That's wonderful. Okay, so you've got a voice, you have a goal, you make sure to guide people through the process. Mm, maybe it's about structure, method, could be. No, it's about style. So let's actually put this here. So we've talked a little bit about style in the voice part, where you're choosing how you're going to be communicating, and then that's going to be affecting a person. But style, I would generally say, is about the end part of your sentences, end part of your paragraphs. So you have a sentence, blah, 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 blah. and then there's like the thing, and then there's like full stop. And then you're going to have like blah, 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 other sentences, whatever, blah, 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 blah. And then there's going to be a thing at the very end of that paragraph. Or there's going to be something at the very end of a scene, which is going to be made of several paragraphs. Whatever, it's made of several paragraphs, blah, 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 blah. And now, boom, there's going to be this big hit, like this slap across the face. This is also connected to fading ink, and it's also about simplification, and it's also about like guiding people. It's also like a bit connected to this idea like you guiding them, but it's also coming from the voice, and it's also part of a goal to have like certain symbolisms that you're taking them through. So these are all kind of connected, where you try to get to this slap at the end. Like the slap at the end of a sentence might be a thing. So you might punctuate or order the sentence to have a little bit more like directness. Or maybe even at the end of it, there's like some sort of slight reveal, or like, whoa, what was that? Or like, huh. Like you might be creating some sort of effect from the sentence. Not always, but sometimes. But almost always at the end of like a paragraph, well, not almost always, but more frequently at the end of a paragraph, you will have this kind of thing that like you're tying up the front part of this paragraph to the back end of this paragraph so that this one slaps and creates this idea. So the main idea or whatever is there. And I don't necessarily think I do that religiously, but it's just kind of a thing that you'll notice over time, that if you are putting these like little stylistic slaps at the end of paragraphs, it's really nice, really helpful, because you've got all these tags and stuff in here that are explaining things and guiding things for people, and then all of a sudden you tie those together and it slaps. Um, and you will do that in conversations as well, like dialogues and stuff, but we'll talk about that in a moment. And eventually at the end of your scene, well, you're meant to communicate to them the whole point of the scene. So the whole point of the scene is going to come right at the end, and you basically going to summarize everything, just like do 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 do, and this is the point. This is the idea of the whole thing that you just created. And I am not like a writing architect. I'm not someone that thinks about every single mechanism or whatever. I literally write at the same speed someone can read, and it's done. Like it's a draft that is basically good enough to be read, to be experienced, to be done. Like I don't like going back and re-editing and stuff like that. I just like to create something immediately, just like bam. So I'll think over a week, and then I'll think about like some design structure elements and stuff, and then I can juggle all that. And then I know how to create my paragraphs, and then I know how to create like my scenes, and I know how to create my episodes. Um, And recently I've started to turn it into like episodes rather than chapters, because I just feel like it saves in people's minds a little bit clearer, because they're like, oh, yes, that. Anyways, but you basically you would want to write like a chapter every time that you sit down to do something, but maybe you have a different process. But what I would do is I'd just write a chapter, or these days I'd write like at least a part of an episode, like the first third of an episode, the second third of an episode, maybe two-thirds of an episode. I'll write that in like a 4 hour sitting or something, maybe less. Um, and yeah, I'll just be aware that it'll have a point to it that we'll eventually get to, and then bang, I'll make that hit. And that's a big consideration, because you are guiding people and you're being like super considerate about that. But where you where you get your payback is in that stylistic like little slap. It's like ah, and I also kind of feel happy about the fact that the voice is whatever voice I want it to be. It's not the voice that the audience is like, I only want this voice. I'm used to literature voices. I want perfect grammar. I want this. I want that. It's like, nah. You don't get to choose. You just make it interesting and cool for what you're doing, and acceptable for the genre that you're using. You have your own goals. You're going to be getting a person here. They're not going to be aware of these goals until like the very end, where they sort of like, oh, this was the goal. Like for myself, um, my books go into magic and start to teach things about magic, or they start to teach things about character choices and the depth of identity and stuff like that. So this is also going to be about your philosophies and stuff like this. And this is going to be a hallmark of your design, your ideas, your writing. Um, if your goals are just kind of simple, I want to make a good book and be liked very much, it's not going to be something that gives you like a brand or a feeling to how you write. And for me, that's like super important. So, for example, Christopher Nolan, he's a director, but his brand is interacting with time, and that's his thing. Like, and he also has this philosophy, these philosophies that bleed into things like um, doing things in silence, like doing good acts even if nobody's watching, and things like that, and making choices for yourself. So he's got this kind of brand idea that people like and enjoy, and they're like, oh, I like that. That feels good. And this is going to be part of his symbolisms. It's going to be part of everything that he does. And there's going to be a voice in his direction, the way that he moves things through, and how he introduces characters, how long he stays with them, what perspective he does it from. You know, you've got that voice, his goal, and then he's going to guide you through everything. So he's going to introduce the Joker. I never studied his things, so I'm just making this up as I go. But as the Joker, he sort of guides you through a way of understanding the Joker by saying like, oh, he's part of a criminal organization, but he's not a part of criminal organizations. Oh, you know, he's a good guy, but he's not a good guy. Oh, he's out to kill Batman, but he's not out to kill Batman. Is so he wants to like destroy him in the soul, like destroy his soul, but not destroy his body, because that's the way that he works. He's got this duplicity about him, this two-sidedness, and so he gets to display things, and he guides the audience through that in the way that he does. Like there's a robbery, and then there is the moment where he burns the money. So you're like, well, you robbed it because you're a bank robber. And then it's like, I'm not a bank robber. I'm going to burn the money. So it's explicitly creating that symbolism as part of the guide as well. So, you know, this will bleed into this, and then this will bleed into this. So that's a cool thing about writing. And yeah, just something to note. And probably the next thing that I would say, and probably maybe the last thing I would say about writing, after you got the style and all that sort of thing, is the hmm, how iconic it is. And this is very difficult to learn. So this is something I'm only starting to understand now, at the later ends of the current story I'm running. So I'm running a story, Secrets of Mana, and it's about, yeah, well, the premise is just like someone's reborn, so it's very manga-esque, and so on. Um, and that is something I should discuss. So you've got like literature, but which is very Western, and you've also got like Western sort of storytelling, and then you've got like Eastern sort of storytelling, and you've got manga. And I really like the looseness and openness of the design of manga, where you can talk anything, do anything, and sort of play around with like people walking through worlds and stuff. Like I kind of like really like that. In the West, we do have like adventure fantasies, but I kind of find them a little bit more linear than I like. So this is kind of like to point to point to point, and I never really liked that. I found that like suffocating. So I like the idea of like manga is much more of a sandbox where you go from one place to another depending on where you want to do it at what particular time. So you want to also select what kind of what inspiration and direction you're going in with your writing. And these days, okay, so once you do start to understand how to create things iconic, you can actually start blending these together and changing them and shifting them, which is pretty hard to learn how to do. But so there is a point to writing, which is most people, what they will do is even if they have a great voice, great goal, they're a great guide, they have amazing style, they're going to come up to a point at which they create a story, and it's going to be this original, cool, interesting story that, maybe some aspects people have seen before, but all the nuances, all the changes, all the plot twists, all the whatever, uh, they they're going to be kind of this new remix of things, and it's going to be nice. You follow it through, you go through it, and you're like, that was nice, and you're like, yay, you're like happy about that, but it's probably going to slip your mind at some point. You're probably going to forget it. Like, what was that again? Like, how did that work? That can be a feature of a story where basically the ink is erased after a certain period of time. You can then re-experience it. And if the experience is so amazing, you just keep coming back to it because then you can re-experience it again, which is also a fun thing to do with stories where you are aware of the fading ink and you purposefully create a gap between like certain information and certain experiences so that people aren't being triggered to remember their old experience of the book like right away, like they're not getting the triggers here. They're going through an experience and then they get triggered with the information um that they've forgotten. But when you go iconic, when you try to go iconic, what you're trying to do is you're trying to take the voice, the goals, the guides, the styles, everything, and you're trying to boil it down into a couple different things. And basically, when you're trying to create something iconic, it's going to boil down to a couple different principles. It's going to boil down to dialogue, and it's going to boil down to your dramatic action. Now, keep in mind, you do have like goals and you have like these symbolisms and these lessons that people are going to remember. And you might think that's what makes it so iconic, or it's going to have a voice like Forrest Gump has a specific voice that's super iconic or whatever. You might think, oh, that's what makes it iconic. Or you might be like it might be super well guided, like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where it has this it literally injects these moments where it explains things. And it's going to be super guiding and it's going to be super iconic. And you might have something that's super stylistic in how it represents itself. Like, what is super stylistic? I can't really remember. Most things have like a degree of style, but maybe something like The Sixth Sense, where stylistically it's like, oh, here is the twist reveal of this thing, bah! And then it like hits you like a slap. Um, and maybe those are what it's remembered for iconically. But to me, the idea of iconic design comes through dialogue and dramatic action. And it's going to change depending on what genre you're doing. So if you're actually doing drama, dramatic action is the times when people have to take action, like they can't stay passive without the world changing for them or around them or changing their current state or whatever. And the rest of it's going to be made up from dialogue, which sort of leads up to this point of dramatic action. And so essentially, what I do with iconic things is I scene set. Uh, so you always set a scene or stage that everything's acting upon. You set up your characters as well, who they are. Some would say that character is also a part of iconic storylines and so on. And you're kind of right, because if you give them a fully fleshed out story themselves that is interesting from their point of view initially and completely, then you're going to have complete characters, which is going to be good, um, which then is going to lead in. But what I typically think is that character leads into dialogue. So if you don't have a fleshed out character, all dialogue is going to be the same. Like everyone's just speaking from like the author's point of view. I purposefully create kind of like a game in my head that starts playing. So this character has these properties or whatever, and this character has these properties, and how are they going to bounce together? And I kind of like set up a little game or playfulness in my head of how they're going to interact. And you're going to have like the main series of dialogues. So what's the main goal of the dialogue? You're going to have the voice of the dialogue, you're going to have the goal of the dialogue, you're going to have like a guiding thread through the dialogue that helps people understand things. You're going to have style within the dialogue where like people's opinions are revealed, or like a twist happens and it's like, whoa, what? But you're also going to have different sort of layers to a dialogue like this, where there's going to be the main dialogue, probably between two different characters or something. Then you may have like something like an explainer dialogue or some other thing that inserts tags or does whatever other things. Then you're going to have something which is just flavor. So this could be like a third person, a fourth person, something in the background, someone that interrupts, something like that. And then you're going to just have like silly beat moments. So just something happened like that was just random, that just happened. Like as they're having this conversation and this thing sort of explains it or whatever, and then there's this kind of flavorful thing that happens that kind of interrupts two conversations to give it kind of a break or breathing room. Then all of a sudden you just have like this other random thing happen that has nothing to do with anything, even within the conversation. It's just like, oh, they were talking, and then blah blah blah, and then this person had to explain it, and then they had a really good zinger, and then uh, you got to sense something about the world with this flavor thing. Like there was a specific person walking past that had like, I don't know, like cat ears or something, or like a super fancy coat. And then they go to like that was heading towards like a food stall, and then uh some person says something super serious or whatever, but then with this tiny little beat you might just make it so that the person with the super fancy coat spills like ketchup on themselves, and it's like, what the hell, damn it, why? I just bought this, and it just interrupts everything happening here to make it a little bit more iconic, a little bit easier to remember, a little bit more like playful or fun or whatever. So you can have these layers and you can just set them how you want, but you just set like a hierarchy of like importance in the conversation. So a dialogue has a composition, and the dialogue composition shouldn't be too complicated. It should just be like a main thread and like some secondary things to add in your tags and whatever. And it should all be natural. if you're formulating this thing of like these conversations and they're just like super hammed in specifically for something to get information across because you're too stressed in the moment to actually think about how they're actually gonna be having dialogue, you're missing out. Play with it, have fun with it, sit with it, enjoy it. Allow it to go places that you're like, what? Why did it go there? That was funny. That's like what? And you just kind of like loosely steer it, guide it, like a bunch of pack of animals, a pack of like wild cats and dogs just doing stuff and competing and doing random things, and and you know that one specific part it's not going to be as important as the other, and you can maintain that, but then something might happen which might make you say like, actually, let's make this the main idea. let's change let's change track, let's do this. So dialogue is made it makes a book what it really is. Like if you have amazing dialogue where things like bounce back and forth and like there's these little beats that interrupt, it's going to give it so much style. People are going to be guided really well to understand things because whenever you have dialogue you have at least some time to add flavor about the world, flavor like, and guide explain things to people without being too like obvious about it, and also keep them in this interesting sort of main dialogue that's happening. And it can just be really, really engaging, really fun, and sort of, I think people's minds are so adept socially, like as human beings, the dialogues can be very like you can be way more fun with it than you would think. You don't have to be direct with information. People pick up on social cues like that. Like they are so clever. Like the audience is going to be so clever about dialogue. They're going to be like, "Oh, that happened. Oh, that happened." Or they can just skip it and just be like, "What was the main point of his thing?" Because that's how good we are with social communication. So you want to make sure that your dialogue is truly something special and super fun, and that's going to come down to that sort of compositional way that you structure it and make sure that there's different weights to the different elements that you're doing there. I wonder if this thing, I think, yeah, just all dis okay, great, fantastic. um so um the dialogue's composition is massively important to the iconicness of the book and how it's going to come across to people, or the script, or the movie, or whatever. And I've always learned writing from an idea of a consumer, not so much as the writer himself. And oh, I'm writing. Don't interrupt me. I am writing. It is more important right now. No, I just kind of like think of it as like, what are some dream things that I want to watch? What do I want? What do my friends want to watch? What do they want to read? And then I just kind of like create that. But the dialogue composition is super important because it's gonna make up so much of the book, so much of it. It's just like an important facet just to have completely right. This is like the equivalent of in art where you have like faces and characters. Like it is so important to have your dialogue amazing because otherwise it's just a picture of landscapes. It's just like, oh, there's a landscape over here and a landscape over there. Or you could say that dialogue is just as important as landscapes. And without that, you just have like this empty whatever. All right. So now let's describe dramatic action. What is dramatic action? Dramatic action is how you describe fight scenes, interactions, and conflicts. So, if people are talking, it can be dramatic action, but you have to have them have different goals. Don't always make your dialogue dramatic action. They don't always have to have an argument. Like, I have seen some really good lessons online where they're talking about writing and they say, like, always give someone an argument, a point of view. People aren't always arguing all the time, so I don't think that's a very good habit to get into as a writer because then you're just trying to do everything for a stylistic effect, and you might be destroying some other aspects like your specific goal or the voice that you're thing, and you may be like hemming it into some other specific voice that you don't necessarily want. So dramatic action is about how to describe, say, like a battle scene. And so with a battle scene or something like that, I will set up symbols for the battle scene. I will set up ways to guide people to understand things. So instead of saying something like, oh, he did a jab and then he did a parry, which came down, and stopped it. Like this guy's punching through, and this person's like coming down with a parry, and then they changed their footing and they stepped around, and then they glared at each other menacingly. You don't describe the the actions that people are taking in a fight. You describe the effect and the feeling of the fight. And to do that properly, you sometimes have to set up symbols or ways to express the emotions that a person is going to feel in a fight. So, for example, if you're going to get a bruise and you're going to feel bruised in a fight, and this is going to be the consequence of this battle or something, is someone is going to get bruised, then how are you going to describe or create that bruising effect in the fight? Um, you might set it up as like it hit right in the lip, whatever. Maybe your voice is specifically like a bit more casual in the lip. So you set up something like blah 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 did this and this and this, and it was fancy, and it was like whoosh 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 and blah blah blah. Boom! It hit. Damn it! Right in the lip. Um. And then you say like, then it flushed red, flushed, flushed red, as blood trickled down. And now you set up this idea of bruise, this effect. Whoa. And yeah, you have this thing of like, oh, he's it was a spin kick. Um, he looked cool, his hair flailed, hair like span span around. And it was so flashy he couldn't even determine what was happening at the time. And then bam, it hit. Damn it, right in my lip. Ah. And you might be going through like some thought processes a person has, like separate into like a thought dialogue, and it's like, oh, my lip. It's like it flushed red and then trickled with blood. Now you've created the that bruise, right? You've created that effect. And this is what dramatic action is all about, is to make those consequences actually feel real. So if it's like, oh yeah, and then he jabbed, and then this other person parried, and then like this other person like jabbed back, and then it hit him, and then he came back, and then he hit this other guy. It's like you've got to stop. You got to break this out. You got to say like, okay, what did it? What was the whole point of that jab? Is like he moved quick, like a snake in the grass. His jabs darting out in front of his face. Uh, he wasn't sure how to gauge the distance, and so each one was closer than the last. Um, the his opponent stepped to the side, trying to sneak his way out of his view. Uh, he knew enough about fighting that he knew he shouldn't allow it. But should he spin and turn, or should he step back? He stepped back, unsure of what to do. Um, you're setting up this kind of like thing of like, what is this feeling? What is this weird thing happening here? And then it's like, oh, all of a sudden, when he expected another jab, uh, his opponent's hair spun, his motions of his entire body contorted into a strange whirlwind of liquid whirlwind of motion. And before he knew it, uh, the flash of the spin kick hit him. It was so perfect. It was beautiful in how he moved. He was impressed. He was stuck in place, impressed by his opponent as this spin kick came right at him. It hit, bah, right in my lip. Ah. Then his lip flushed red and blood trickled down. So you're creating this drama in the action. And it takes a while to actually learn how to do that, to create that drama in the action. So we're not just talking about a simple thing here where it's like, oh, to create dramatic action, well, there's just one tip that you need to know, that you just need to basically blah 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 blah. Like you have to say, Nani, why? Oh, he's 7 power levels above me. Ah, like, because this is going to come back into your voice, and then it's going to come back into your goal and how you're guiding people. Like, okay, maybe you set up some symbols beforehand, but you can just set symbols up on the fly. You can have them in your mind and just say like, well, I want to set up the symbol of like the experience from the inside, and then like how flashy someone looks, and then I want to set up the idea of like when a punch comes, it comes in like a staccato effect, like strobe lights are on, and he's disoriented as like the punch comes in. He's like, ah. So maybe, and I won't think about like everything, like, oh my God, we need to jam in 1,000 different ideas in order to make this dramatic action work. I'm just kind of exaggerating it, but you'll just generally do it kind of casual, sort of minimalistic, just enough to make it like this dramatic action, like really fun, and have like tons of beats, like ba 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 ba. It's like, oh, whoa, 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 that happened. And if your fight scene has enough dramatic action in it, enough beats, it's going to just come across as like so much longer than the fight actually was. So someone can have a fight for like 3 seconds, 5 seconds, and then all of a sudden it was like a lifetime for that person. And you can do that. So you don't have to have these long, sprawling scenes expanding several pages long and whatever, because if you can capture the dramatic action in that moment, then you're going to be doing pretty well. So um dialogue and dramatic action, you're going to have like all this scene setting and stages and character moments and maybe like philosophies and symbols, and you're going to be doing that most of your writing, like, which is like 90% of your writing is just going to be like blah 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 blah. I mean, obviously your dialogue's going to take up more than 10%, but I'm just saying like that 90% feel of what you're writing. Yeah, you're going to set up a scene at the start of a chapter, and you're going to set the stage like earlier on, and then you're going to do any sort of character development things when it's necessary, like either early on before an interaction, or during an interaction, or after an interaction. There's different consequences to that, and you develop your character development, or like maybe world development, or the world building, or some other idea, whatever. um but then you're going to get to these points where boom, dialogue's happening, time to make it interesting. Boom, action's happening, time to make it interesting, because these are going to be your like the icing on the cake. They're going to be like the pow. So you want to make that hit as much as possible. So you have this iconic idea, which is where then you think about the dialogue and you think about the action and how they come together to describe the impact of the story. So in Forrest Gump, for example, the voice of Forrest Gump and how he interacts with everything, how he talks to everyone, the specific actions he takes in certain moments, it all comes into like an impact, a way that a person feels, a way that a person's like, Oh my God, he's so brave. He's so straightforward. He's so honest. I admire this character so much. He's super capable, super impressive, and just like wow. And he has like these disabilities that make it like his life harder, but it's just wow. And the impact is just there. You can just feel that impact. Or say, for example, Chris Nolan and The Dark Knight. Um, the goals of like the Joker, like how he's trying to express this duality and whatever. In every dialogue scene, it starts to set up this idea like, oh, I'm super nice and I'm super blah blah blah, but I'm also vicious. So he's setting that up through every single dialogue, and in dramatic action, he'll do that too. He'll be like, "Whoa, I'm like super nice. Don't like what? Like why are you picking on me?" And then he's like, "Duh, I've turned the tables. I've got you." So everything that he's doing, it has that same sort of idea, that same impact, which then eventually comes through at the end, where you just remember the Joker as this two-sided, two-faced kind of character. Um, which is kind of funny because there's Two-Face in that movie, and Two-Face doesn't do that, so it's just interesting. Um, that's in part because, writers aren't omniscient. They don't know exactly what they're doing. They know when something's hitting right, but they won't necessarily know, oh, I've got to break that down to this and then go back to this and then do that for this other character. Like it's pretty hard to do that. Like you've got limits, but yeah. And then maybe you're guiding people through like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Well, in dialogues, you want them to be super fun and funny and like informative. Like, what is this? How's it happening? They really shouldn't be able to do this. What? Make sure you have blah blah blah. Like that dialogue is going to give this impact of like a panicked situation where you need to be prepared, and if you're not prepared, then everything's going to f- fall away into nothing, and it's just going to be horrible. Um, while the action, you know, it's a similar thing. Like they'll have like this setup of here's the scenario, here's the whatever, and now it's not going the way that you want it, and it's getting worse, and it's getting worse. And then here is the effect, which is probably an effect of like feeling terrible because that was way harder than it needed to be. And why is it this hard? That's so stupid. So, you've got this kind of voice in the action and so on going there. But, you know, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is kind of based on like guiding people through things. And then you have like this stylization, this impact. So let's say, I think The Fifth Element is really good with style too. Rather than talking about what was it? M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense. We can say Sixth Sense. So The Sixth Sense, the dialogue, it's all very creepy, mysterious sort of dialogue, and the action scenes, it's like "Ooh, doo, 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 doo," like this. Oh, this thing happened. Ooh, doo, doo, doo," like whatever, and that sets up this theme and impact of the entire movie, creating that iconic feeling. But say The Fifth Element, um, it does it a lot in its setting and its style and its design and structure, but it also is super punchy. Its dialogue is punchy. People will like be doing quips to each other, making points, and then sometimes soften and be super super emotional and soft to each other. So it's about that like hard exterior, soft center kind of idea, which is a big part of the entire movie. It's about like this almost immortal figure who is actually soft inside, super vulnerable, because it's about vulnerability and it's about like capability and the vulnerability that allows you to be capable. Like you're not going to be as powerful as you can be if you're not vulnerable. That's the whole point of that story, the whole iconic sort of idea of like the fifth element is like love and softness and vulnerability. Um, and like humanity, your humanity. And so the action in that is also really poppy, punchliney, kind of played for jokes, that sort of thing. Like they set up the dramatic action is like, oh my God, there's 21 people in that room, and da 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 da, and then he just comes out, and it's like, oh yeah, no, now there's like five or something. I can't remember it exactly, but they play it off in that certain way where it's so hard, it's going to be impossible. Capable person walks in. Oh, actually, it's easy now. You know, so they set up that expectation, and it's like, no. And then all of a sudden, it's like slap across the face. Look at the style of how this has like impacted you. Person's capable. No one needs to fear. No one needs to fret. And then, they'll obviously like turn the tables and be like, oh, you thought nobody needed to sweat? Yeah, he's super capable, but let's see him deal with a bomb. It's like, yeah, I can't deal with that one. I think we're going to run. So they do that kind of thing where they set that up, and it sets up these beats and this iconicness that is just like awesome. So um, that is basically a breakdown of writing. I've never really broken that down before, so I didn't really know that I would set it up like that. But yeah, I think that's pretty true, or pretty close to the idea. Um, and say something about concept that I didn't mention earlier is that when you are creating a concept and it's loose, and it's so loose that the very next week you've forgotten it, like it takes a week and you've forgotten it, then that's probably not a great concept. So what you want to do is you want to just kind of like look at your concepts and feel them out for a bit. And maybe you'll write like 30,000 words, 10,000 words, whatever for a concept. Maybe you will. And then you'd be like, nah, nah. But you have to break that cycle. You have to get into the idea of like, it's okay to make mistakes. So often what I do is when I am writing a story, I will actually purposefully make the start of it kind of bad. I'll, I'll like just do exposition. I won't be like going into every character's thing and motivation and yet I'll just do exposition, and I'll do like staler aspects of characters. Yeah. And then like I'll just like input random things, like input random meh, because I know that until I have the heart of the story, we don't know how to break down this. And this comes back to the same thing as drawing does, which is when you are drawing, if you don't have the design, like you don't know what the design is, then the method won't matter. Because a method will create something specific. It will create a specific result. So I see a lot of artists, well, some artists, that focus on a method of how to get good at something, and they only focus on that one method of how to do something so that they can create one specific kind of artwork, and then they say that's their brand. That is good so long as it is a purposeful design. If it's just a randomly attaching yourself to a method and you can only spit out one result and you're just like, okay, I'm okay with that. Okay, if you're just okay with that, that's fine. But what I would generally say is that most of drawing isn't going to display how amazing you are at something, because you're going to be searching for the design. And once you have the design, that is what's going to make something strong. Um, so when I am searching through a concept, I will be looking for the ideas that make this design interesting, fascinating, and cool. Because then if we do touch-up work later, like for my writing, my eventual goal is to create like manga or some sort of like episodic structure. And so I, I've always kind of kept an idea that the design is going to be the most important thing. You're going to have to jump back to the design. Once you have that, you know what to erase. You know what has to stay, because they're going to be structurally important to the design. Like you could write so many things, but they might not even matter because they're not important to the design or the thing or the characterization or the person or the whatever. And maybe that's not even important to the dialogue and to the, to the action. And so you're like, oh, so we don't need that part. We can erase that part. And so later, when you're sort of rehashing it, you just kind of like remove that part because you want this inherent design. This is what directors do, like Danny Villeneuve with his Dune movie, like where he made that. He took the book and then sort of converted it into like an actual movie that was much more visual in its storytelling than ever before. He just basically took the design elements. He took the strongest design elements, and then he thought about how to display them, and he thought about like sub design elements as well, which is super advanced. Like, okay, I've got a scene, right? And he's got limited space because he only has a certain period of time, and he only has like certain dialogue and certain actions or whatever. He picks the best actions, the best dialogue scenes. He's like, okay, that makes sense. We'll just use these ones, these key ones. These are awesome. But then he has to, in the set design, in the structure, in the little beats of different things that they're doing, he has to put in all the design elements that have been missed from the other parts that he's erased, and he has to infuse them into this main core of that scene so that it's connected and so that he has it. And if you really want to compactify a story, like you want to make it compact, you want to make it easy to remember, all that sort of stuff, because there's going to be compact stories and there's going to be looser stories. And I kind of like looser stories because there's so much, like, you kind of forget them and then you can like re-experience them. That's why I like looser stories. But say if you're going to do it compact, like Denis Villeneuve in Dune, is then you're going to want to structure the designs to have these sub-design elements around this core element, so that it's all there in one place. You can feel it all, sense it all, and to some extent, that's better storytelling because it's so much more efficient and it remains in the save state of someone's mind and it becomes like iconic. For that reason, but you can also be iconic for a reason of like the experience that you're feeling, so there's that as well. So in looser designs, it's about the feeling and the experience that you remember. You remember like that. I was just free. I felt free and open, and it was amazing. That's kind of what I try to create in my worlds. But like in a compact thing, maybe the idea is to create just literally the world or the people, that world or that person. You felt like you met them, you felt like you knew them, you felt like you could spot that person from a crowd or whatever. So this is going to be in part like what your goal is and how you're going to do that, and that's going to be connected to your design. So you don't have to write perfectly. You want to say, when you're creating the general gist of your story, you want to get to the design elements. And there are other things in considering design in storytelling, which is you might want to do things like framing, um, where you might say this is let's say this is a pitch up shot, and there's this person that's standing over you, you know, and they're like, you I don't know, should be ashamed, whatever. So a person standing over you doing whatever, and rah. So, and you're knocked down on the ground or whatever. He looks pigeon-toed. That's kind of awesome. All right, so maybe you're framing shots or whatever in all your compositions. So there's like this design of like your directorial design, where you're doing that at like your frames, the point of view, where the camera is, and even in people's minds. Yeah, you can set up impossible characters with people's minds. Like that's one of the advantages of writing, right? but then you can also set up realistic cameras as well. And then you have, so that's directorial. You can also have editorial design. So editorial design is about the workhorse part of yourself or whoever's doing that part of writing. Like if you're going to have tons of ghost writers, they essentially set up like lots of different premises, and then you select from them, and like that they're going to be working as a workhorse. And then you have uh, the meta. Okay, so what is a workhorse and what is the meta? So the workhorse is like the artist. And the way that an artist builds things is he builds a block and then builds a block and builds a block and builds a block and builds a block. And, you know, as they're writing, they're building blocks, building blocks, building blocks. And, you know, this one ends up with way more blocks than the others, blocks, blocks. So he's like, this is the most fruit in the design. Wow, that's amazing. But he's taking all this time to get to the design, right? So the workhorse guy, maybe like 90% of it isn't even designed properly yet or whatever. Or maybe it's like 50% of it isn't designed or whatever, it doesn't matter. But he's going to have all these wasted sort of blocks that, you know, as an editor in this meta, you're like, well, this is the part that matters, and we'll just get rid of the rest. And as an editor, the editorial design process is like, do we want to do that? Do we want to erase these little bits? Do we want to make something looser? Like, if we keep these, it's going to be loose. That's going to have an effect. If we remove all these, it's going to be compact, but is compact better for this kind of story? So that is editorial design, is where you look at the crossovers, how much sort of bleed you want of like these sort of smaller aspects that show the organic generation of like this, you know. So you're gonna take in considerations that. Then you're gonna have like these stylists sort of approach to design. And stylist approach to design is going to be like, oh, you know, I want these like two-tone shadows. It's gonna be like super intense, like whoa, it's gonna be like this strong shadow under here and under their eyes, and whoa, it's like oh, and then there's so much like blah. And so there's going to be this stylistic element to things. So, for example, what is it? Game of Thrones. The stylistic element of that is to over-describe everything, right? Like George R. R. Martin over-describes scenes, settings, whatever, and it becomes this stylistic thing that just is constant. I've actually never read it, by the way. I've just heard that, so take that for what you will. So these stylistic choices of a writer, um, you know, you could edit designs based on that. Like I like to compact the stylization down into this, this, and this idea, and so we're going to repeat certain stylistic choices over and over again so that people start to remember it. I remember George Lucas talking about the 3 Star Wars movies. He said they all fit to a similar rhythm, which is like they we meet the protagonist, they go off to a place to do a thing, something's different, and then this other thing happens. And like so they all sort of follow the same journey. And so he was like, stylistically, I like the idea of them all following the same rhythm and journey. Like each episode is going to read very similarly, but just be a sort of remix of the other. And so that's a stylistic design, which then simplifies this editorial process and has like a directorial sort of concept embedded in it, which most people won't see, but they'll experience it as like, oh, they're always kind of like very similar, and he kind of like fleshes in this kind of iconic design to his stories. as a stylist, um, right? And then you're going to have, your workhorse design, which is just as I said, you create all these things, then you get your design, whatever, and then you just put that out. I'm currently still doing this. So until you know specifically what your design is and what your stylizations are, and until you know exactly what these directorial and editorial sort of concepts are that you're going to be using, you're probably just going to be a workhorse. And for me, I do directorial, editorial choices on the fly. I do that. And there are some stylistic considerations that I'm slowly putting in. And it's very difficult to do all these properly. Like it takes forever to learn how to do that. But yeah, that's kind of like that aspect of design and how important it is in writing as well as in as well as in drawing. So we have what is it? It's going to be like way further down, right? So perfect. And then we're going to have design with the four different elements of design, which is, you've got a workhorse, you've got an editor, you've got a director, and you've got a stylist. So that'll be your expert, like your main artists, your like senior artists, sort of, you know, and if you have like great stylists, that's really going to help something. And like if you're a great stylist, it's really going to help things. And even if you're a good workhorse person, that's going to help things because you're going to get like these really rich ideas of design. And if you're a director, that's going to add to the design. If you edit it properly, respectfully, deeply understanding something, that's going to add things to the design as well. So there's these concepts to design, which is super important. But as a writer, you consider the voice, super important. Then you consider the goals. You guide people through the story, and then you add aspects of style. You make sure your dialogue's good. Make sure your action's good. Make sure that creates like a nice impact, and make sure, secondarily, you've got like that you're not writing in a void, so that you have correct staging, and texture, and whatever, like staging, uh, look, whatever. Like, I just put that as a sub thing because I think everyone should just kind of just be like, yeah, don't put it in a void. Make it clear where you are. And just, if you do that at the start of like scenes and settings or whatever, you're just like, okay, we're in this stage now. Okay. We're in this episode now. We're in this place now. You set it within context. That's what it is. It's ultimately context, isn't it? If you set up context, you set up staging, whatever. That's this other thing. So like there's tons of little parts and little pieces that you learn about that. But yeah, essentially don't want to be doing it in your voice. You can do it in your voice, but probably not going to be doing it in your voice. You're going to have a voice though. It's going to be very specific to your writing style though. Then you're going to have goals. This is a lot about symbols. You're going to guide people through things. This is often about tags and the sort of structure of your writing, making it sort of compact and like helps people through things. And you're going to help that with like dialogue and your actions so that it helps describe things. And also your symbols are going to like help construct that. The voice is going to help construct that as well. Until you get to your stylistic considerations, where you're creating impact, you're creating twists. Like good writing isn't just creating twists or something like that. You're like, if you lose your voice, if you lose, there's no goals, no points of view, if there's no like guiding elements in the story, and you're just going for a twist. Like M. Night Shyamalan is hit and miss because he's a poor guide. Sometimes he's a great guide, but other times he's a terrible guide. And that breaking down breaks down the impact of style. So you've got this kind of like build up, which is all important, but then, your dialogue's important. And M. Night Shyamalan, he always has that same dialogue, which is overly, like there's too much dialogue in ways that a lot of people don't speak. Sometimes it's not, but sometimes it is. And the action. Sometimes you can fall into this trap of like your action is just action for action's sake, rather than setting up the dramatic aspects of that action, which is super, super important to create an impact. And if you create dialogue that no longer has impact or action that no longer has impact, then it's going to like fall apart. And like if you didn't guide people and they get confused, then it's they're not even going to get to this impact because they're going to be just lost and not know what's happening. And if you don't have goals and stuff, then you're not going to have substance in your design in the process and what people feel. And if the voice is too much like, oh, I have to be like literature because literature is the only way that writing works because that's the format that other people have taught me. No, 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 no. You got to understand that art evolves, writing evolves too. So, for example, back in the day, people only painted like religious things. Then they only painted like portraiture and stuff like that. And then they started to move to things that were like impressionistic, expressionistic, then into things that turned into abstract design. And you have to understand that the voice of your book could actually go into abstraction. You could have literally parts of your book that are abstract poetry. You could you could do that and then have that contrasted with actual um, very clear, crisp sort of edges and lines and understandings. You could create an entire novel in strange abstract poetry. You could do that. It wouldn't be impossible or silly to do that because art changes. And it's the same thing with writing is that it should change, it should develop. And you should understand that when you're writing. So a lot of people might criticize my writing and go like, what? Where's your English grammar? And I'm like, eh, I communicate a certain way. I'd prefer if I'm sitting down for hundreds of hours, thousands of hours writing a book, that it be in my communication style, not be like rigid or like someone else's communication style. It's going to be mine. And your voice is going to be yours, but it's also going to be fun. It's got to be cool. It's got to be interesting. That's it. That's it. And then, you've got goals. Like people are smart enough to determine what your voice is and to understand it and to adjust. They really are. So it's not something to worry about. Your goals, this is going to be about like the true deep substance behind things. And, then you're going to guide people through. You're going to be considerate. You're not going to say like, read my mind. No, no mind reading necessary. Maybe some for like deeper aspects or deeper nuances or something because you're not going to spend time explaining everything. And sometimes you might need a person to like search, but you're doing that purposefully. You're making sure that the main aspects they're guided through, that it's simple enough. Like fighting scenes, so like the principles that define the world make them easily understandable. And then when you go to style, yeah, you set things up so that they have a stylistic impact, whether that be your sentences, your paragraphs, your scenes, your episodes, the entire end of the story. You make it have like that slap, bap, where it comes in, and your dialogue and your action is going to help create like that impact. If you do that and you find your main designs and you stylize it right and you workhorse it right and you direct it right and you edit it right, and then you can probably create something much more towards the iconic route. And you also have your staging and the look and the context of things always set up in scenes. And yeah, that's basically it. Probably the only other thing that I would describe about writing is the Gamebox. And the sandbox is just your world design, everything that is possible. Not everything that is possible in the world is going to go into the story. And then you've got the game box, which is the rules for characters. Every character is going to be different, and they're going to bend or break some rules depending on who they are. Like they're going to be able, like someone super influential is going to be able to like turn someone who otherwise wouldn't be turned or something. And you just want to set up a kind of a game box setup idea so that when your characters are interacting, it's not always you as the author that is defining the story. This is just so much more interesting when you're writing it so that you're just like, that happened? What? Now, I don't go so far as like rolling dice to see what happens or something like that. I just kind of know that someone is definitely going to take this tactic. Like there is going to be a tactic in play, somebody's going to use it, and there is a useful tactic in this scenario. There's probably an overall strategy as well. And do any of them see it? Do any of them stumble on it? So someone might be silly and dumb and not know what they're doing, but you're like, oh my God, they stumbled on the tactic. No way. Or this is almost falling in line perfectly with a strategy. What? Why? And they start to win in this game box scenario, and then they rise in power, and you're like, whoa, oh my God, now this person has extra capability here. So for example, in The Dark Knight, I would say that the Joker keeps winning in this game box scenario. Whenever he's allowed to play, he often wins, especially against Batman, who's very stuck in his ways. And so that's an awesome set of tactics. He's very tactically profound, but strategically, maybe Batman's working with others and stuff like that then leads to a better strategy that allows him to win in the end. So you've got these kinds of ideas of like game boxes and how you want to run like a game box in the story, because if it doesn't have a kind of a game box feel, it's similar to it not having a sandbox feel. Like a sand, like most stories, most Western stories won't have a sandbox feel. They won't have like an open world where you could go anywhere. It'll be like, no, the design of the world is very limited. But there you go, there it's done. And but something like amazing, like Blade Runner, that had an amazing sandbox feel. Like, oh, there's so much to it. Star Wars had an amazing sandbox feel. Oh my God, you can go anywhere. There's so many different things. Star Trek has an amazing sandbox feel. Go anywhere, meet all these different things, blah, 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 blah. It does get limited because there's certain races like Klingons and Romulans and la 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 la. Um, but you've got that sandbox feel. If you don't have a game box kind of idea of like ways people can win, ways they can react to each other and all that sort of stuff, then you get power creep. And power creep is this thing where, in order to add drama to a situation, you always make the character stronger than the adversary. And so the adversary has to get stronger, then the character gets stronger, then the adversary gets stronger, then the character gets stronger. You don't need to do that. You can just have a looser set of tactics, a looser set of strategy, and say someone's really strong, but they tactically mess up or they strategically like didn't see something in the scenario that contextually is more important, then you can add in symbology as to why the main character wins, or theme into the reason the main character wins, or at least survives. And someone might be more powerful than them, attacking them, and the odds are against them. And you might think that the only way that this story can turn out is they're gonna die. And that's good. If your game box can handle, like, the main character is definitely gonna die, and you're like, well, because the scene, the setting, the power of people against them, they're definitely gonna die. There's no chance they're gonna live here, or they're going to be maimed, or they're going to be like, there's no way for them to win like clean. But there are scenarios in this game box where they can win clean. It's just incredibly unlikely, and you configure that idea in your head. Then as the story is running, you know somewhere in the back of your mind there are ways that they can win, but it's just probably not going to happen. And I don't know, Lord of the Rings kind of does this incorrectly, where essentially, you have the eagles, which could theoretically take them over Mount Doom and just like drop them off into the lava volcano if there wasn't a giant eye watching them, like a giant eye of Sauron watching over them, and if there wasn't like an entire like horde of like things here, and like these wyverns that are gonna come up and fly as well, with like the Witch King and stuff, like ready to attack them or whatever. But hey, the maybe they do plan to do this, and it becomes like almost like a heist movie where they have to get it into the volcano. It could happen like that, but they kind of set it up wrong, where the game box doesn't really exist. And part of that is because the whole point of the story of the Lord of the Rings isn't to have a game box. It does have like a sandbox. Yay. But it doesn't have a game box. Because everything is destined. There's destiny, and it is essentially a fable or a tale where things just happen as a set of history. Like, it's history that was already written. And so, in that sense, when you're trying to tell something in a historical way, you're probably not going to create a game box, because you're like, but it happened exactly like this. I know it might be unbelievable, it might be strange, you might be like, what, why? But it happened like this. And sometimes you can't set up a game box because the limitation of things is that it's not going to have one. And sometimes that's going to happen. But as a writer, as you're learning to write, what I would suggest is that you do try to create both. You do try to create little game boxes, little sandboxes. They don't have to be big. You just create a little sandbox in your head. You just create a little game box in your head, and then you have them interact. So this gives you the landscape and the setting and the scenes, landscapes and scenes. And this gives you the characters, dialogue, and dramatic action. But and dramatic action. But not everything in your story is going to be defined by these, but some of it is. You're going to also want to do like little design sessions where you sit down and you think about like design elements that can be employed or used as tools to make these next sort of ideas interesting. And you're going to be also sitting down and making sure that you have the voice right. You're going to be making sure that that you're guiding people correctly. You're going to be making sure that the style is coming out right. You're going to be making sure that the what was the other one? Voice. I'm going to cheat. Goal. I wouldn't have remembered that for whatever reason. Goal, because it is so integral, but I just wouldn't remember it because it's like so subconsciously integral. So the goals and symbols and stuff, like I would be setting up a design session that creates elements for these and for this, that has a good voice, has good goals and symbols. I've sort of pre-prepared in my head like some quick guides, and then I'm like, oh, stylistically, maybe I'm going this direction. So I'd set up these ideas. Then go into like design elements and stuff that I want to do. Like I might spend a week thinking about design elements. It might be a few days, might just be a few hours, whatever. Then I'll know the game box for my story and I'll know the sandbox for my story, and I can expand on those at any time. So a game box, for example, is going to have a main set of rules, but then it's going to evolve to get like these secondary and third editions of the rule sets where new forces come into play. And that's how I stop power creep, is I have like the game boxes, they do the thing, and then it sort of reduces and you get that sort of thing. Same with the sandbox. I'm going to have the main sandbox area, the main sort of design structure of where the world is. Then there's going to be a second sandbox, and then there's going to be additions, and then there's going to be further additions and further additions and further additions. And maybe they're not all going to display in the story, but I'll remember that they're there, and I might put like Easter eggs or little touches of ideas so that the world grows and expands, and so on. So they might start in a town and progress to a city, and then start showing what happens in a nation. I wouldn't show a nation right away, because if I'm showing a nation, then you don't know what all the differences in towns. You don't know the differences in cities. And so, you think about how the scope of what you're doing, and you're always doing something within a limit, whether you realize it or not. There is always a limit to how many words, how many scenes, how many characters you're going to have, and it's all going to like spiral out. So you got to learn to control that, and then you set up your game boxes and your sandboxes and your design elements, and you think about all that, and you set up your iconic sort of idea, because ideally you want it to become iconic. If it can't become iconic, you want it to at least be an experience. And so for me, most of my writing journey, I've just been trying to create experiences. I haven't tried to create anything iconic. Probably the most recent thing I'm doing, it becomes iconic, but I believe it becomes iconic, but it's not iconic right away. My next book will probably just be iconic right away. It takes so long to learn how to do it properly. It's very difficult. And there's also a difficulty in translation. So something I've learned about like storytelling, even game design, is that people that want to, for example, create a new Star Wars, uh, the problem with that is essentially you have a design formula, and if you don't understand the design formula and you don't understand the actual sort of components that are breaking into this, and like the voice and the structures and whatever, one mistake in any of those components can just absolutely change the design and make it no longer what people saw as like Star Wars. And we saw that in like more recent sort of developments. Like some people are actually achieving it, like Dave Filoni or whatever. He's pretty good. He changes some elements of the design, but not all of them. And like Dave Filoni is the one that did Ahsoka. Um, but it's very difficult for any writer to get to the level, or any director even to get to the level where they can break down a design and then essentially reestablish things in like and reset things and redo things. It's very, very difficult to do that. You have to understand the design, you have to understand all the elements I've talked about earlier, and you have to know how to create something iconic at the end of that structure, which is incredibly tricky. Um, Incredibly tricky. Like it's more tricky than anyone anyone imagines possible. But you've got to be respectful as editors, you got to be respectful as like the stylists, you got to be respectful as like whatever. Something that recent Star Wars did right all the time was they respected the style. So their stylists, their designers that did like costume design and things like that were fantastic. So they hit some of the buttons, but you make a mistake in just one of these design elements, boom, it's over. If you can't create a correct sandbox or create a correct like Gamebox for that design, then the design's going to have no life. And this is what most people come into as writers, is they might be able to create the design or recreate the design of someone else's, but they're going to lose the sandbox. They're going to lose the rules of that world, or they're going to lose the feeling of that world as it expands. And so when they expand it into a new aspect, that doesn't fit with the previous designs of like the setup of how that world was going to grow. And so you've got those considerations. It's going to be incredibly difficult for someone to design that right and to expand it right, and it takes an incredible amount. Like Danny Villeneuve and how he did his thing of Dune, like the first part of Dune, because we haven't seen the second part yet. He's going to be taking more risks in the second part. I'm super interested to see what he pulls off there, because if he pulls off the second part of Dune as well as he pulled off the first, then that means he has insane design chops. Like, whoa. And we will see. But design is not easy for any writer, and any writer has to be somewhat humble in regards to that. You can't just like spit off iconic designs because you make sure that your characters always have like a tsundere and have like a deri and like a whatever. Like Derry is just super sweet, kind-hearted, like main protagonist person or love interest, and then Tsundere is like, no, I'm not interested in you, but really has a heart of gold. Like whatever. That's for like Western manga stuff, but you know what I mean? Like maybe you have a hero and a mentor, and the hero is like super capable at learning, and the mentor is super wise. Like that's Western stuff, right? And you're like, I can create it iconic because of this trope. No trope should ever be the thing that you rely on to create like what is iconic. You need like the symbolisms, you need everything. So writing is a big, tough thing to tackle, and it feels like that. It feels like wrestling pigs. I used to consider it like this, kind of like a ruler, where I'd have like, oh, there's these things that reach certain points and reach certain points and reach certain points, and there's story loops. So there's halfway story loops, there's like thirds, acts, story loops that are interacting with each other. Then you've got like these minor beat interacting with each other that have to like beat with each other like this. And then you've got cross loops where this one's going like through here and then it comes through here and then it hits back here and then it comes here and then it hits this here. And like there's like this whole spaghetti thing of how all the storylines connect to each other, and some, they're linear and they're connecting directly to their beat structure, like the actual episode they're in or whatever. And then, you've got these larger arcs. But these days, what I do with these larger arcs and these is I'm not too worried about the structure of when they interact. I'm just like, well, I've got a large arc, which is going to be super important. I've got like a slightly less important arc. I've got this arc, and I've got I've got flavor arcs that are just there for flavor. They're important. what is a meal without flavor? You want a meal with flavor. And I've got like this main thing, which is just like that's the nuts and bolts. That's how this whole thing works. That's how the whole story works. So when I'm considering like the start of the story, the middle of the story, the end of the story, I just think about like these main arcs. And then, I have these side arcs, which are often character arcs, or they might be like specific experiences you want, like experiences arcs. Like, for example, in manga, there's always like a fan service thing or something like that, where it's like, oh, do you want like a fan service arc here that's going to go in place of like a character development episode or something, and you're going to put that in, and then you're going to have these flavor arcs, which are just there because they're cool. And then you're going to have like an arc that's just silly, like Breaking Bad has The Fly, where they're literally just chilling out, and then there's a fly in the room, and they're like, "What is this?" And you just have like this random, impromptu, improvised scene, and it's cool because it's just different and it adds asymmetry, breaks things up, it adds more depth to the world, more interest and stuff. So yeah, you can break down every single structure and blah blah blah, but I just generally do it like I do dialogue now. Um, and you'll get like the feel for like writing where you wrap back to a previous statement and then go back forwards, and then you'll sort of mentally be able to go ahead in time and back in time before you even write. And then as you're writing words on the page, you've already done all the processing that's required. You've done design set up before you've even sat down to write. So you have the designs that then you can feed into this thing that's churning, and you've got this engine that's cooking all the stuff. There's a Gamebox in here, there's a Sandbox in here, and you're like cook, 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 and it just renders in real time, and you're just like capturing it as you're writing. You're like, I'm writing this, and you're taking into consideration everything in time, trying not to miss a beat, trying not to skip a thing, trying to like hit the point as you need to hit it, and then hit it, and blah blah blah. And sometimes you miss. To me, that's the beauty of writing, is the risk of getting it wrong. So don't try to sculpt everything, get everything right. Just start to learn from the simple things first. Just get your voice right, make your choices there, get your goals right, get your choices there, your symbolism. If you have to write a book to just understand symbolism, do it. I wrote a book about a paladin who uh, has, like, he's more powerful than he has any right to be. And it's like, why are you so powerful? And I wanted to explain how he's powerful through symbolism and like explain why he's powerful. And that's the message of the story, is like, why is he so powerful? And then have the story symbolically kind of explain it. And to me, that was this like bombshell thing where I did finally understand what made him so powerful. I was like, that's why he's powerful. Whoa. And I spent, it was 2 books and maybe the start of a third one until I understood. And then I was like, okay, I'm good. And I put those books aside. Yeah, maybe later I'll turn them into something. But for now, they're just drafts, and they're just there. They were part of my writing journey to help me understand how to develop symbolism, how to infuse goals and things into things. So sometimes you'll actually have to write books to understand how to develop symbolism or something like that. And you'll have to do that project to understand it. And then you'll be like, whoa, that's how it works. I can't believe that. And like voice, you'll have to write a few books until you start to understand voice, because first you'll put on a weird voice and it'll just be strange, and you'll be like, ugh. Your voice will be your own at first, and it's like, I went to this, and this was my memory, and this is what happened. Like, you just talk about yourself. You have to get that out of the way. So write those books about yourself first, whatever, get them done, get them out of the way, then start writing things to start understanding symbolism and stuff. Then, you can get a job in the industry doing writing, like formalized writing or whatever. This will help you learn to guide things for audiences, because if you do something for an audience, you do have to guide them, and then you'll start to learn that guiding process better. And then style-wise, I think that just comes from writing experience. This is actually one of the easier things to gain, and you're just like, oh, so then I can go beat, 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 hit, boom, 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 and you just, it's kind of like a performance aspect. You have to act, you kind of have to feel, you have to emote with the moment, and then see how something builds and then how it explodes, and you're like, whoa. And then the design element. This is something that once you are doing all this sort of stuff, okay, you're going to have to get into design. You're going to have to start to understand the different roles of design, and you're going to have to start to understand like the dialogue and the action and the impact, and make sure you're never doing something in a void, and then sort of slowly determine what's going to make it iconic. And that's going to be like the main basis of writing. So this is like some random surge of information, and I know um, it's not a tutorial. It's a breakdown of all the different moving pieces that are going into things. And some pieces I'm not even seeing anymore because they're just like boiled into my brain. Um, but this is most of it. This is most of it. Like most of the moving parts that you'll see. There'll be some like hidden things and some things you'll be like, oh, you never mentioned that. And that's cool. So find those for yourself. It's going to take time. There's no way anybody can develop a writing sense for you. I've probably only written for 5 years intensively, maybe. Um, but I've probably been writing for 15 years. So I don't know how to develop this super quick because I learnt it slow. Part of learning writing for me was a super personal process because I wanted fables and stories for myself. Like I initially started out with stories of examples of people I wanted to be or didn't want to become. Because I didn't necessarily have the best examples and role models in my life. So I was like, scratch all that, like forget that. I'm going to create role models for myself, like people I want to be, people I don't want to be, so that as I developed as a person, I had real role models, real examples, and things like that. So storytelling was super important for me in like my growth as a person and my own identity. And that's how I've used storytelling. And it's why I think it's so important to be a storyteller, is to help people find their identity, help them find like depth and purpose in life and how to become better. And so for me, it's like so deeply ingrained with like who I am as a writer. But that's why I learned it so slow. I wasn't trying to become good for a reason. I was just trying to become good for like myself and then eventually my friends. And then after a period of time writing books for my friends and I to understand things, develop things, I was like, well, now we have to create some iconic stuff for everyone else. So that's actually why I then picked up drawing, because then I'm like, okay, I have these stories, I need to tell them. Writing is a hassle. Like if someone has to read, they're not always going to understand that the person that is writing this is actually good, that it's considered, that it's been through decades of like thought processes and blah blah blah. They're not necessarily going to be able to tell that right away, especially if they don't like writing, like reading. Like I don't like reading, but I love writing because it's such a part of my life. So it's like this weird dichotomy where I'm super separated from writers because I'm like, I don't like reading a lot. I'm not going to break down and study how someone else has written something and then say, oh, that's how you write. Because that's not how I learned. That's not how I wrote. That's not what I felt was important about writing and storytelling. And I had my own purpose behind it. So in drawing, I do a similar thing, but I just learn it like quick, 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 because I want to get to a point where I do create something deep and moving, and but it's easier to access. And so I know that visual storytelling is easier to see these stories. And so that's really what I'm doing, especially with chemical ink. I just want to make it so that I can do something nice and fast, super emotive, super excellent, and we can get into loose storytelling, tight storytelling, iconic storytelling, all that kind of stuff. Someone can pick up the pictures, read them, have a ball of a time, get immersed, and then come out the end going like, "Whoa, that was amazing!" So that's the idea. That's the point, and you're gonna have your own. So follow that to wherever it goes, and I hope my opinion helped. All right, take care. Bye.